Welcome back to Real True Crime Stories, where we dive deep into some of the most shocking and controversial cases in true crime. If you're fascinated by twisted betrayal and the lengths people will go for wealth, today's story will leave you speechless. A wife, her best friend, and a $1.5 million insurance policy. What happens when trust is shattered and greed takes control? Stay with me, because this one ends with a shocking twist you won't see coming. Before we get into it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to never miss a chilling story. Like this video if you think some people will stop at nothing for money, and comment below with your thoughts. Who do you think was the real mastermind in this case? Alyssa Turner, 34 years old, had everything anyone could want. A lavish lifestyle, a successful husband, and a best friend by her side, Jasmine Blake, 32. But all that glitters isn't gold. Alyssa and Patrick Turner, 38, seemed like the perfect couple. They were admired by their peers, wealthy, powerful, and living a life many would envy. From private jets to exotic vacations in places like Bora Bora and the Maldives, they had it all. Their Instagram posts were filled with sunny beach pictures, glamorous events, and over-the-top parties. The world saw them as the ideal couple, living a life of luxury and success. But behind the picture-perfect facade, there was a hidden tension. In the early months of 2023, Alyssa's stress mounted. Patrick, once the loving and attentive husband, had become more distant and abusive. He was absorbed in his work, often coming home late, but it wasn't just the physical distance that was troubling Alyssa, it was his emotional detachment and the subtle ways he began to belittle her. At times, his words cut deeply, his criticism unrelenting. The man she had once admired and adored had transformed into someone unrecognizable. Alyssa, always the glamorous wife, now struggled with a sense of isolation. The lavish gifts, the private jets, and the exotic vacations couldn't mask the darkness creeping into her marriage. Jasmine, her best friend for over a decade, had been there through it all. The two women were inseparable, partners in crime, as they liked to joke. But by the spring of 2023, Jasmine, who had always played the role of Alyssa's confidant, started to show signs of jealousy. She had watched Alyssa thrive, basking in Patrick's wealth, while she, too, dreamed of the same life of luxury. Jasmine, 32, had never been shy about voicing her frustrations with her own life. But Alyssa, consumed by her deteriorating marriage, didn't fully recognize how deep Jasmine's envy ran. While Alyssa and Patrick's marriage fell apart, Jasmine quietly grew resentful. She longed for the life that Alyssa had and often confided in her about feeling overlooked. Alyssa, not seeing the warning signs, continued to reassure Jasmine, unaware that her best friend's jealousy had been festering for years. What began as harmless complaints soon became something darker, as Jasmine grew more convinced that she, too, deserved the life Alyssa had. In the months leading up to the shocking betrayal, their friendship, once so solid, began to crack. Alyssa's growing worries about Patrick, combined with the constant tension between her and Jasmine, set the stage for something far darker than anyone could imagine. The trust they shared would soon be shattered in the most unimaginable way. Part 2, The Plot Unfolds, 4 to 7 o'clock. The once bright and airy home that Alyssa and Patrick shared now felt suffocating. Shadows of doubt and resentment loomed over every corner, especially when the doors were closed and the world outside couldn't see. Alyssa, now 34 years old, and Jasmine, 32, sat in the privacy of Alyssa's walk-in closet, their whispered conversation carried on the faint hum of the air conditioner. No one could hear the dangerous plans unfolding between them. Behind closed doors, Alyssa's perfect world was crumbling. The woman who had once basked in luxury and praise from her peers now found herself weighed down by the increasingly volatile and abusive behavior of her husband, Patrick, 38. He'd grown colder, more critical, and unpredictable, and Alyssa had finally reached her breaking point. She no longer cared about the lavish lifestyle or the reputation they'd built. What mattered now was escaping the emotional prison she had locked herself in. The tension between the two women was palpable. Jasmine, standing by her friend, knew she had her own motives. She had her own deep-rooted resentment, not just of Patrick but of the life Alyssa had. Jasmine's mounting debts, the failed business ventures, and her envy of Alyssa's wealth had pushed her to the edge. She wanted the luxury, the mansions, the vacations. She wanted it all. And Alyssa's misery offered the perfect opportunity to claim what she felt was rightfully hers. Late one evening, as they sat in Alyssa's darkened kitchen sipping wine, the conversation took a more sinister turn. Alyssa, her voice a whisper, revealed the life insurance policy Patrick had taken out, $1.5 million, a sum that had grown in value over the years. It was meant to provide for his family in the event of his untimely death, but Alyssa saw it as her ticket out. The years of emotional manipulation and torment had drained her, and she couldn't see a way forward without a dramatic break. The money would give her a new life, and Jasmine, as always, would be there to support her, only this time, the support would come with a dark cost. Jasmine's eyes glinted as she agreed to help, her voice laced with excitement. This wasn't just about helping her friend. It was about taking the life she had longed for. They would make it look like a tragic accident, a slip on the stairs, an untimely fall. Patrick, still active in his business, often seemed distracted, detached from his own health. He'd mentioned having stomach issues and headaches in the past, which Alyssa could easily manipulate to fit their plan. Over the next several weeks, the two women moved cautiously but with purpose. Jasmine helped Alyssa buy the poison they would use, a deadly substance that could be administered slowly, unnoticed, over time. It wasn't an instant death. No, this was meant to be gradual, so no one would suspect foul play. They chose a poison that would cause Patrick's symptoms to mimic those of a severe illness, even down to the nausea and dizziness that would make him dismiss his discomfort as something minor. It would take weeks for the effects to be felt in full. He would grow weaker, increasingly ill, but by then, Alyssa would have ensured his death had seemed like nothing more than a natural progression of his declining health. The poison was purchased in the dead of night from a supplier who knew nothing of its deadly potential, just a simple transaction that would change everything. Jasmine, always meticulous, kept track of every step they took. She ensured Alyssa planted the right seeds of doubt in Patrick's mind about his health. "Maybe it's time you saw a doctor, Patrick," she would say, slipping the words into casual conversations, giving him a nudge in the direction they needed. Meanwhile, Alyssa carried on with her usual duties, keeping up appearances. She would encourage Patrick to take his pills, to drink the concoction she'd mixed, and assured him that it was just a part of getting older. But every day, the poison would take hold of him a little more. His health deteriorated, but Alyssa's smile never wavered. She could already see the light at the end of the tunnel, the $1.5 million insurance payout that would set her free. But as their plan moved forward, they hit a few snags. Patrick grew increasingly suspicious of his own condition. He questioned his doctor's advice, refused certain treatments, and began pulling away even more. He wasn't convinced he was simply ill. Alyssa tried her best to reassure him, pretending that everything was normal, while behind his back, she was carrying out their deadly plan. Then came the night they had planned for so long, the staged accident. Jasmine had arranged for Alyssa to make sure Patrick would be alone when the time came. Patrick, already weak and disoriented, would slip on the wet tiles in the bathroom, his head hitting the edge of the sink. It would look like an unfortunate fall, the perfect cover-up for his death. Jasmine would even help Alyssa ensure that no evidence of foul play remained. But despite their careful planning, they didn't anticipate the unpredictability of their actions. The death of Patrick Turner, the man Alyssa had once loved and now saw as the barrier to her freedom, was meant to be the end of her suffering. The funeral, though filled with sorrow and the expected mourning, was a mere formality, a veil to conceal the truth. Alyssa, 34, grieved outwardly as any wife should, but inside, she was already counting down the days to the insurance payout. With Patrick gone, she thought, she could finally start her life over. But little did she know, her world was about to come crashing down in the most unexpected way. It all started with a single, cryptic message. Alyssa's phone buzzed on the night of the funeral, the screen lighting up with an unknown number. She ignored it at first, assuming it was just someone reaching out to offer condolences. But when she opened the message, a chill ran down her spine. "I know what you did. Patrick didn't just die. And I can prove it." Alyssa's heart skipped a beat. She stared at the text for what felt like an eternity. Her hands trembled as she tapped the screen, deleting the message quickly. It couldn't be real. Who would know? But that was only the beginning. Over the next several days, the messages grew more frequent, more specific, and far more threatening. Alyssa could feel the tension building in her chest as each new text came in. The anonymous sender seemed to know everything: how Patrick had been poisoned slowly over weeks, how Jasmine had helped her, and how they had planned the accident. The details of their plot, which had once seemed so carefully orchestrated, now hung like a dark cloud over Alyssa's every move. "You thought you were free. You thought you were smart. But I know the truth. You better pay up if you want me to stay quiet." Alyssa could feel the weight of the words pressing down on her. Panic began to rise in her chest as the sender hinted at their knowledge of the poison, the way it had been administered so subtly, and the staged fall she and Jasmine had orchestrated. The fear of being exposed, of everything coming undone, gripped her. Every time her phone buzzed, she nearly jumped out of her skin, convinced it was another message from the blackmailer. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to delete everything and hope it would go away. But that wasn't possible. The messages kept coming. "I've got more than just words. I've got proof, Alyssa. And I'll make sure the world knows what you did." Alyssa found herself looking over her shoulder every time she stepped into a room. Every knock at the door made her heart race. The creeping dread of someone knowing her darkest secret had begun to consume her. No longer was she free to celebrate her newfound life. Instead, she was trapped by her own lies, suffocated by the fear that someone she couldn't see or understand, was holding the power to ruin everything. She began to panic. When she was alone, she would scroll through her phone, checking for new messages. As soon as one came in, her fingers would fly over the screen, deleting it before anyone could see. But the constant barrage only intensified her fear. She couldn't avoid it. She couldn't outrun it. One evening, after a long day of pretending to grieve, Alyssa stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. She looked the same, but she felt like a different person, a woman on the edge of being exposed. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the edge of the sink. Her eyes flicked to her phone on the counter, the screen lit up with another new message. Her breath caught as she read it. "I've seen the poison. I know how you did it. You won't get away with this, Alyssa. You've got 48 hours to make things right." The words hit her like a slap to the face. 48 hours. She had no idea who this person was, how they had uncovered the truth, or what they wanted in exchange for their silence. But one thing was clear: Alyssa's perfect plan was falling apart at the seams. She ran her fingers through her hair, staring at the message in disbelief. Her mind raced. How could someone have gotten so close? Was it Jasmine? Was she the one behind the threats? She had been the one who'd helped her plan it all, but had she betrayed her? The more Alyssa thought about it, the more paranoid she became. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. She couldn't even trust herself. Desperation started to set in, and she began to feel the walls closing in. The luxurious life she had dreamed of, free from Patrick's controlling grasp, was slipping through her fingers like sand. The blackmailer wasn't just threatening her reputation. They were threatening her very freedom. Alyssa started deleting everything. Texts, calls, emails, anything that could link her to the crime. She began wiping her devices clean, using every tactic she knew to cover her tracks. But even with all the precautions, the fear never stopped. Her hands would tremble as she did something as simple as checking her bank balance or making a grocery list. Every knock at the door made her freeze. Every person she encountered could be the blackmailer, watching her, waiting for her to slip up. Soon, the weight of the threats became too much. The luxury house she'd worked so hard to maintain started to feel like a prison. The walls, once a symbol of wealth and success, now felt like they were closing in on her. Alyssa was no longer in control. The money, the lavish lifestyle, the insurance payout, it was all slipping away, replaced by one overwhelming thought: how far would she have to go to silence the blackmailer? At first, Alyssa thought the messages were a joke. But soon, she realized, they were far too real. And with each passing day, the noose tightened around her neck. Alyssa stood frozen in the dimly lit lobby of the abandoned hotel, her heart pounding in her chest. The eerie silence of the place seemed to amplify every sound, every breath. She had been led here under the guise of meeting the person who had been threatening her for days, the blackmailer who had made her life a living nightmare. But as she looked around, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. There was something off about this place, a coldness that made her skin crawl. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Her palms were slick with sweat as she clutched her phone, her fingers instinctively tapping on it, ready to dial the police if needed. She was already planning her escape, thinking of how she would handle whatever confrontation was waiting for her. And then, from the shadows, she saw her. Jasmine Blake, her so-called best friend, stepped into the dim light. There was no smile, no warmth in her eyes, just a cold, calculating look. Jasmine's expression was unreadable, but Alyssa could sense something was terribly wrong. This wasn't the reunion she had imagined. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat as Jasmine walked toward her, the click of her heels echoing in the empty space. Every step felt like a countdown to the moment Alyssa would learn the truth. "You showed up," Jasmine said, her voice flat, almost mocking. "I didn't think you would." Alyssa's stomach churned as she tried to understand what was happening. Her mind raced, 1,000 questions flooding her thoughts. She had been terrified of this meeting, but she never imagined it would end like this. You're the one who's been threatening me?" Alyssa whispered, barely able to process the words. Her voice was trembling, as she took an instinctive step back. "I thought it was someone else, someone who knew about what happened to Patrick." Jasmine's lips curled into a smirk, the expression sending a chill through Alyssa's veins. "You're not as smart as you think you are, Alyssa. I've been in control this whole time." The realization hit Alyssa like a physical blow. Her knees buckled, and she nearly collapsed onto the floor. She had thought Jasmine was her ally, her confidant, the one person who understood her. But now, standing before her, Jasmine looked like a stranger, a woman whose loyalty had been a lie all along. You were the one pulling the strings. You set me up." Alyssa gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. Jasmine nodded, her gaze never leaving Alyssa's face. "You think you were the mastermind, huh? Well, that's where you're wrong. I knew from the beginning that I could use you. You were the perfect pawn." Alyssa's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process the magnitude of what Jasmine was saying. She had trusted her, believed she was helping her escape from Patrick's cruelty. But all along, Jasmine had been playing a dangerous game, manipulating her every step. "I don't understand," Alyssa whispered, her voice shaking. "Why would you do this to me? You're my best friend." Jasmine's eyes gleamed with something cold, something dark. "I didn't just want the money, Alyssa. I wanted control. Power. I've been in the background for so long, watching you, waiting for the right moment to take everything for myself." She stepped closer, her words cutting deeper with every syllable. "You were just a stepping stone, a means to an end. And now that I've got you here, you're no longer of any use to me." Alyssa stumbled backward, her mind racing as the weight of Jasmine's betrayal sank in. She had been used, manipulated into believing she was on the path to freedom, when in reality, Jasmine had been the one pulling all the strings. Everything, the plan, the poison, the staged accident, had been orchestrated by Jasmine from the very beginning. The coldness in Jasmine's eyes was enough to freeze Alyssa's blood. There was no remorse, no hesitation in her voice. She had planned it all, and Alyssa had been too blinded by her own desire for escape to see the truth. "You really thought you were going to get away with it, didn't you?" Jasmine taunted, taking a step toward Alyssa, her presence now looming over her. "But now that you've served your purpose, it's time for you to take the fall." Alyssa's heart pounded in her chest as the realization hit her: Jasmine had never been her friend. She had been a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike, and now Alyssa was caught in her trap. The walls of the hotel seemed to close in around her as the full weight of Jasmine's betrayal settled in. The woman she had trusted more than anyone else had used her as a pawn in a game for power and money. And now, there was no way out. Alyssa's hands trembled as she stepped backward, her mind scrambling for a way to escape the situation. But there was nowhere to run. Jasmine was in control, and Alyssa was trapped in her web of lies. "You've got nothing left," Jasmine said coldly, her voice filled with venom. "Your little insurance scheme is over. The money, the freedom, it was all a lie. And now, you'll pay the price." Alyssa's world shattered as she realized the full extent of Jasmine's manipulation. There was no escape, no redemption. The woman who had once been her closest friend had turned into a ruthless enemy, and Alyssa had no one left to turn to. In that moment, standing in the cold, abandoned hotel, Alyssa understood the true cost of her actions, and the cost of trusting the wrong person. Jasmine's smile widened as she watched Alyssa's face drain of color. She pulled out a stack of photos and papers from her bag, holding them up for Alyssa to see. The images were damning, each one a testament to the woman Alyssa had tried so hard to hide from the world. There were photos of Alyssa at a seedy hotel, her face blurred with drunkenness, locked in the arms of a man who was clearly not her husband. There were text messages, painfully explicit, and notes detailing the affairs she had hidden from Patrick for years. But the worst part was the drug paraphernalia, prescription bottles, lines of powder, and the evidence of Alyssa's constant battle with addiction. Alyssa's breath hitched as she took in the evidence, her pulse racing with panic. She hadn't thought anyone knew, let alone that Jasmine had gathered all of it, neatly packaged, ready to destroy her. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her like a vice, every mistake she had made, every secret she had tried to bury now laid bare in front of her. "You can't expose me like this. I'll lose everything." Jasmine tilted her head, an eerie smirk playing at the corners of her lips. "Oh, I can do it. And I will do it, Alyssa. You can't stop me. But there's a way out for you." Alyssa's heart skipped a beat as she tried to comprehend what Jasmine was saying. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine leaned in closer, her eyes glinting with a mix of malice and satisfaction. "You've always been a manipulator, haven't you? So now it's time for you to make a decision. You can continue to be my pawn, and I'll destroy you. Or you can do what you do best, manipulate someone else into taking the fall for you." The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating Alyssa. Jasmine had her cornered. There was no way out unless she did exactly what Jasmine wanted, but that meant losing everything. The fear of losing Patrick, the fear of being exposed, the fear of falling completely, Alyssa's mind spun with the pressure. But just as the panic began to set in, a thought, cold and desperate, flashed through Alyssa's mind. She could do this. She could regain control. She had played the game before, and she could play it again. She had made so many people do her bidding in the past, had manipulated her way through life for so long. Why couldn't she do it now? Desperation gave her clarity. Alyssa's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a tense smile. "You think you're in control, Jasmine," she said, her voice filled with venom. I can still take care of you. You want to play dirty? Fine. I'll play dirty too. Alyssa's mind raced with a twisted idea, a plan to rid herself of Jasmine once and for all. She would have to act fast, and she would need help. But help could be bought. It always could be. She needed a hitman, a cold, faceless killer who would make Jasmine disappear, who would make the woman who had once been her best friend vanish without a trace. But as Jasmine leaned back, her expression shifting into one of smug satisfaction, she spoke again, her voice carrying an edge of finality. "Oh, Alyssa, don't be so naive," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The stage has already been set for you to take the fall out alone. Do you really think you can escape? I've been making moves while you were busy playing the victim." Alyssa froze, her blood running cold at Jasmine's words. It hit her like a ton of bricks. Jasmine had known all along. She had orchestrated every move, every detail. The poison, the staged accident, everything. And now, Alyssa was the one who was going to take the blame. She had been the perfect pawn, and now, she was left with nothing but her own guilt, and the harsh reality that Jasmine had outplayed her at every turn. Jasmine's voice was soft now, almost a whisper, but there was no kindness in it. "You thought you could get away with it, but no. You're the one who will pay for it all, Alyssa. Everything. The blackmail, the police investigation. It's all on you now. And I'm going to sit back and watch you fall apart." Alyssa's chest tightened as she realized the truth of Jasmine's words. She had been too blinded by her own greed and desperation to see that Jasmine had been playing her from the start. There was no escaping this. No way out. Jasmine stood up, brushing off the dirt from her coat as she smirked one last time. "Enjoy the fall, Alyssa," she said coldly, her words lingering in the air as she walked away, leaving Alyssa to face the devastating truth. Jasmine had not only been the mastermind behind her husband's death, but she had also set her up to take the blame for it all. Alyssa was alone now, abandoned in the worst possible way. She had fallen into a trap of her own making, and there was no way out, only the crushing weight of the betrayal that had sealed her fate. The air was thick with tension as the police closed in on Alyssa. She had thought her plan to eliminate Jasmine would be her ticket out of the mess she had created, but it all came crashing down around her in a matter of minutes. The hitman she had hired, the one she believed would silence Jasmine forever, was no criminal at all. He was an undercover cop. An officer working within the very system Alyssa had hoped to manipulate. The shock of it hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her paralyzed as the officers surrounded her. Alyssa's mind raced, her desperate attempts to regain control slipping further away with each passing second. The handcuffs locked around her wrists, cold and unyielding, as the reality of her situation sank in. She had thought she was in control, playing the game to her advantage, but now she was nothing more than a pawn caught in a trap of her own making. She could barely comprehend the gravity of it all. This was the moment everything fell apart. Behind her, Jasmine was led toward the police cruiser, her face betraying the same shock and disbelief. But this was no ordinary arrest. Jasmine wasn't just another accomplice, she was the architect of the entire plan. The mind behind the death of Patrick Turner, the blackmail, the poison. She had been pulling the strings all along, and Alyssa had been nothing more than a means to an end. The weight of Jasmine's betrayal hit Alyssa like a freight train. She had trusted her, believed they were partners in this twisted game. But now, Alyssa saw the truth. Jasmine had manipulated her, used her to stage the perfect crime. The luxury, the wealth, the life they had dreamed of, it was all just a smokescreen for Jasmine's ultimate goal: power, control, and revenge. As the officers read Alyssa her rights, she felt numb. The reality of what had transpired was too much to bear. Her entire world had been shattered in the blink of an eye. The lavish lifestyle, the money, the freedom she had so desperately wanted, it was all slipping away. Her desperate attempts to outsmart the system had failed, and now she was paying the price. Jasmine was not the woman Alyssa had once called a best friend. She was a predator, calculating and cold, with a hunger for control. And now, both of them were going down together. Jasmine had thought she could outsmart the police, manipulate the system, but in the end, it was the system that had caught up with her. The investigation had unraveled everything, every lie, every plot, every betrayal. As the dramatic reenactments of the police arrest unfolded, the cold truth set in. The women who had once believed they could outwit everyone around them were now facing the consequences of their actions. Alyssa's face, once filled with arrogance and confidence, now showed nothing but defeat. The life she had dreamed of had evaporated, and she was left to face the cold reality of her choices. Jasmine, too, was caught in the web of her own deception. She had orchestrated it all, from the murder of Patrick Turner to the blackmail, and now, she too was bound by the handcuffs of her own making. But for Jasmine, this wasn't the end of her story. She had always seen herself as the true mastermind, the one who would walk away with everything. Now, she was facing the consequences of the very plan she had orchestrated, and the weight of her actions was beginning to sink in. Together, they had shattered their lives, their trust, and their futures. The wealth they had sought, the control they had craved, was now out of reach. Their plan to get away with murder had backfired spectacularly. The police had connected every dot, piecing together the puzzle of their betrayal. And in the end, the price of their ambition was their ultimate undoing. As the officers escorted them to the waiting patrol car, the finality of it all hit both women like a tidal wave. Their plan had failed, their lives were over, and they were left to face the consequences of the choices they had made. Alyssa and Jasmine had played the game for wealth and power, but in the end, it was their greed, their lies, and their betrayals that had led them to this moment, cuffed, defeated, and facing the full weight of the law. The courtroom was packed, a palpable tension hanging in the air as Alyssa and Jasmine sat at the defense table, their eyes avoiding the gaze of those who had come to witness the trial. The prosecution's case was clear and damning, the evidence irrefutable. Alyssa and Jasmine, once close friends and partners in crime, were now at odds, each trying to shift the blame onto the other. Alyssa's lawyer painted Jasmine as the mastermind, claiming she had manipulated Alyssa into killing her husband, Patrick Turner, for the $1.5 million life insurance policy. Jasmine's defense countered, accusing Alyssa of pulling the strings, using Jasmine as a pawn to achieve her own goals of wealth and freedom. But the evidence told a different story. The prosecution presented the recordings, the chilling conversations between the two women, detailing their plot to murder Patrick and cover their tracks. The texts, the photos of the staged accident, and the testimony from the detectives who had unraveled the entire scheme left no room for doubt. They had carefully planned every step, believing they could get away with it. Closing arguments echoed through the courtroom. The prosecution laid out the undeniable truth: both women were equally responsible for the murder. There was no escaping the facts. The jury deliberated for only a short time before returning with their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. As the verdict was read aloud, Alyssa and Jasmine stood motionless, the weight of their crimes settling in. The courtroom buzzed with disbelief, but there was no turning back now. Both women were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What had started as a calculated plan to escape a loveless marriage and secure wealth had ended in their utter destruction. They had tried to deceive the world, but the truth had come to light, sealing their fates forever. The prison gates slammed shut behind Alyssa and Jasmine, leaving them with nothing but the consequences of their betrayal. Their pursuit of wealth had destroyed everything: friendship, trust, and freedom. What they thought would be their escape had become their prison. What do you think? Were they both equally responsible, or did one manipulate the other? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories. Thanks for watching Real True Crime Stories. Stay safe, and always be cautious who you trust.